All right, everybody. Hope you're having a great afternoon. Welcome to another episode of the Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Placer, and we have not only a developer chat lined up, but we're going to be doing a live demo of their game afterwards. So please welcome back to the cast from Side Quest Ninja, Chris Knowles. How are you doing?
I am doing pretty well, thank you very much. Yes, it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's been, I think, like a few years since we last spoke, and I'm sure nothing of big note has happened since our last chat, right?
Yeah, basically nothing. I mean, I haven't moved house. Lots of other things I've planned to do haven't happened. So yeah, nothing really has happened.
But it's great to hang out with you today. As I just said to the audience, we're going to be chatting with you first, and then we'll be doing a demo of your game that we'll be talking about for the next hour. And as always, for any developers watching, if you'd like to come on and talk about your games or have a demo of them, please get in touch. So, since it has been a while, and we certainly have a lot of new people watching these days, could you, I guess, briefly talk a little bit about who you are and what is your background?
Well, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm British. So I joined the games industry in 2007. I started working at Jagex in the UK, the people who make RuneScape. And I worked for them all in, actually, for about 13 years. And I spent about half that time working on RuneScape itself, doing engine stuff. I shipped a few of the games, and unfortunately, none of them stuck around. Sadly, Jagex has yet to crack the sort of second successful game, unfortunately. But towards the end of that time, I went part time. I set up Side Quest Ninja, which is basically a one man indie studio, but I've got freelancers helping me with stuff I can't do, like making it look pretty. And also did both things for a while. And then I realized actually a year ago yesterday, I left Jagex completely. So I've been a full time indie for almost exactly a year.
Nice. And when we last spoke, our topic was kind of talking about setting up servers and kind of the online architecture for games. So we certainly have a very different cast lined up today. So, as I said, we're going to be doing a live demo of your game. For the people watching, what is Hexahedra?
So Hexahedra is it's an optimization and automation puzzle game. So if you ever played something like Opus Magnum or 7 Billion Humans, Space Chem, that kind of thing, it's that style of game where each level is a puzzle where you need to set something up, in this case a factory, put the devices in place, program it so it makes the right stuff. And then once you've done that, there's the additional challenge of, well, how efficient can you make it? Can you make it run faster? Can you make it run in less space? And that kind of thing. And although they're not working yet, there will eventually be leaderboards of, your friends and, global leaderboards and that kind of thing, if who's got the best solutions to these things. So it's all about optimization.
And of course, for people around here, we have certainly tried a lot of those games, whether it's a Factorial-like, or of course Zachtronics-like, which seems to be like the new, I guess, like hot subgenre trend when people talk about like optimization puzzles.
Yeah, I mean, it is a Zach-like, I guess. I mean, they are the big hitters in that space. And have been for a while. Well, I hear they're going to shut down, which is exciting. I think their next game I said was going to be their last one.
Oh, I have not heard of that. I need to look into that one for sure. Let's see. AJ come from our chat wanted to ask, is the music level still on the plan?
Yes. So this AJ has been. I do all the game dev live on Twitch, and he's been around for a very long time. Yes. So the music mode is planned to be. I had the idea of one of the devices you can use in your factory is just the hitter that literally just smacks the cube, which if it's a glass panel will get rid of it, otherwise it just sort of damages it. And I realized, well, if you've got cubes made of different materials with different numbers of sides, then they would presumably make a different noise when you hit them. So what if we set up a system where a different kind of level, where the aim was to design a factory that made lots of different size cubes and then smack them all in the right order to make a tune? So that would be the music mode. So then the challenge would be, can you design a factory that plays, the Blue Danube or the Tetris theme or whatever it might be? Yeah, so that is still coming. That's that's going to be a relatively late feature, I think, because it's sort of I mean, you almost can't make a Zach-like game without having some sort of mini game in it, right? They've all got Opus Magnum has that sort of solitaire thing and that kind of thing. So it's almost a meme. You've got to have some kind of mini game, and that is what I would be doing with that at some point. Yeah.
Hi, Smokeback. Thanks for coming on as well. Yeah, and the genre itself is very interesting. Like, we've seen developers go in all different manner around terms of complexity and how they present things. I guess, what attracted you to making this, like, your first, like, full-time indie project?
I mean, having worked at Jagex for ages and made RuneScape and so on, like multiplayer games are really hard. Like, I mean, my experience basically told me if you're going to make an indie game, for goodness sake, don't do anything multiplayer straight out the gate. It's a really big amount of work. But not only that, because so far everything's been self-funded, and so I'm trying to do as much as I can. A puzzle game like this is very code heavy and very asset light. So I haven't got to get freelancers to make me 10,000 different versions of Orcs or whatever it is I might need for some sort of big open world game. It's a relatively small, reusable set of models and so on. So it kind of maximizes what I can do while keeping the scope of the game pretty small.
And as we said, of course, said, with this being your first time going full-time indie, it's certainly a very different take from when we last spoke. So what was the decision to go full-time as an indie developer?
Well, I think I'd certainly decided that after 13 years at Jagex, I wanted to do something else. I tried a few other options. There are one or two other game companies in Cambridge, in the UK, which is where Jagex is. For whatever reason, they didn't work out. I'd always kind of thought about, I'd like to get the game in my head out into the world at some point, whatever it might be, the idea of having a go at being an indie. It's always kind of been an attractive prospect. So I think just having decided I want to do something else, the one or two things I tried hadn't worked out for various reasons. So I thought, let's go for it. I'll take a punt. It might not work. I may have to go and get a regular job, sometime next year. Who knows? But it's fun to give it a go.
And what kind of attracted you to making something like Hexahedra? Because again, like a game like a Zack-like or these kinds of optimization puzzle games are oftentimes very challenging in terms of like kind of like the market. So what made this one kind of speak to you as your first project?
I think, well, partly because I'm just making a game that I want to play, which is always going to be good for keeping your spirits up as you go. And it's as I said before, it's I think a kind of game that plays to my strengths in terms of what I can do, in terms of level design. It becomes down to designing puzzle, which is a thing I've done in various contexts. I've made puzzle hunts and stuff and that kind of thing before, so I'm kind of used to that rather than game design in a kind of balancing combat sense, where I'd be much less in my comfort zone. So it's a game I enjoy playing, and I think I've got a reasonable stab of making a fun version of.
So I guess I've spoken to Zach several times, so we had a chance to kind of pick his brain about kind of his puzzle philosophy and his design. So for you with Hexahedra, I guess, how are you approaching the puzzle philosophy of the game?
The what? Sorry, the puzzle philosophy.
Yeah.
So I do have this spreadsheet of sort of what is this level achieving for the player. So is it teaching them about some new mechanic, some new device in the factory? Is it just the same mechanics but harder and that kind of thing? So I'm sort of each level has a purpose in kind of leading you through from I've never seen this before to here you go, here's a massive factory that works really well. So I'm trying to set a goal. It's like teachers talking about a learning objective for their lesson for their kids, right? What's the learning objective for this puzzle? So there's that aspect of it. There's also a certain amount of having fun. So some of the side right now in the demo, there's just a series of levels you go through. But the idea is there will be some slightly more fun levels, kind of as side missions and that kind of thing, where you've got factories that are slightly broken, you've got to deal with them, and they're going to throw things at the wall if you don't get something in the way and that kind of thing. So there's going to be some slightly more playful things going on as well, just as a sort of break of mood.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the store page, the game is described as kind of programming puzzle challenges. And one of the things about what we've seen, like two different takes on this, is we have something like the older TIS 100, Shenzhen.io, where you are basically working with pseudocode to solve your puzzles. Whereas we have games like Infinite Factory. Oh, there's this one that I play about like a Neon Noodles, I think it was called. That was kind of like it was more about like setting up commands, and you're not actually typing in code. With Hexahedra, I guess, where is like the programming side lie with it?
So it's very visual, and it's sort of a grid-based system. So you've got a bunch of command tracks, and so your system will kind of trundle along, executing each command in order. But there are ways to make it to branch. So for example, if you fire a laser at a cube, if you fire a red laser, if it hits a red surface, it'll reflect, and that will cause the logic to branch.
Okay.
So you can then sort of move around your 2D grid, and so you can then build loops and stuff as well. So you can literally make the little sort of marker go around the track in a loop to build a programming loop. So it's a very sort of visual way of approaching the programming.
All right, yeah. So it definitely sounds more like some of the later examples of the exact likes, where it's less about the programming, more about kind of like the visual representation of it, which is good for someone like me, as I have horrible memory when it comes to any kind of programming code and things like that.
Yeah. I'm not going to make you learn assembly. It's fine.
Okay, that's good. So how long have you been working on Hexahedra up to this point?
So I started prototyping in 2019. So before SideQuest Ninja was a thing, I was kind of having a go. But then once I decided, this is the thing I want to have a stab at making, then at the very end of 2019, I kind of set up the company. Didn't actually, and then also got married, which was interestingly timed in terms of
congratulations.
Like, I've gone part time at Jagex, and my first month has actually been like planning a wedding rather than doing any game dev work. But then, so early 2020, so shortly before we all got locked down, I started working from home and making sort of doing production on Hexahedra. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, as we were saying, like, as one of the major topics of the cast is about the decision to go full time indie and how that kind of changes things. So, again, like, one of the beauties for people watching, or nightmares about indie dev, is that every story is different. Like, there is no one size fits all. So, for you yourself, I guess, how has your thought process in terms of game dev changed now with this decision to go full time as opposed to working on it as a part time?
I think so. If anybody's watching and they have a sort of regular paid game dev job and they're still not quite sure what a producer does, become an indie and you'll find out very quickly what a producer does, because there's an enormous amount of just stuff that has to happen, whether it be admin, talking to accountants, trying to do some social media and marketing things, planning, that when you're just used to turning up for a sprint planning meeting, grabbing some jobs the next 2 weeks and then getting on with them. So there's a whole world of stuff, and so which I think could be depressing if you think of the actual sitting down with Unity open and doing some game dev as work and everything else as stuff. But once you realise that all of this is work because it's got to happen, you're still working even when you're doing stuff that like a number of times I opened a spreadsheet at Jagex is pretty minimal, but I'm doing it all the time now for various things. So yeah, your definition of what counts as game dev certainly expands. Because I always would have thought of doing audio work as making sound effects as game dev, but the whole kind of nuts and bolts of coordinating everything, doing marketing is game dev in the sense that it's work I need to do to make a game. So yeah.
Yeah, man, I think that's always a thing that I hear from a lot of developers, especially first timers, when they go to indie dev where they start making their first project. All of a sudden, there's a lot more work than you may originally have thought when it comes to what goes into making a game. And it can be, I think, a little challenging, especially for people who aren't prepared for it. I guess for yourself, what has been, like the most challenging or the biggest change in terms of what you do now as an indie dev?
Yeah, I think, I'm at Jagex, I was mostly used to just sort of getting on with one task and doing it, whereas now I've got all kinds of lead times on things and I've had to go and do things. I've got to go and find freelancers to make assets and so on. And so that's basically, I have to talk to people a lot more than I used to, which, there's a certain amount of stereotype around software engineers, and bits of it are slightly true. So I'm not necessarily the most, maybe surprising people here I am on a podcast talking about stuff, but actually especially interacting with someone I've not met before and sort of saying over Discord, do you want to make me some assets? And I don't really know you and I'm not sure this is going to work out. I just find inherently quite stressful. So I've had to get used to doing that. And it has got easier, which is encouraging. But yes, I've had to sort of do interpersonal stuff that, I was mostly didn't really have to bother with in my day job, when it was my day job.
So, with, I guess, deciding, again, I'm sure you did a lot of prototyping, I'm sure you worked on different projects. As you said, Hexahedron really spoke to you as kind of like your first project. Did you do other prototypes, like, around that same time? And if you did, I guess, what, stopped you from working on them? And the reason why I ask this is that one of the challenges of indie dev, of course, is where to focus your your time and your energy, because again, you can't just work on 20 different game projects and run a studio at the same time. And it is one of those things I think for a lot of new developers they may tend to struggle with in terms of knowing, okay, this idea is, maybe I'll work on this later. This idea, I really enjoy it. I feel like this is a good idea. And then this idea, I hate this. I don't want to work on this anymore.
Yeah, so some of the stuff I did, I quite enjoy interactive fiction. So I did a little bit of dabbling in that. But I think I decided from a sort of practical business point of view, that was probably a harder sell for actually making a living at. It's the kind of thing I can do in my spare time on sort of small scale stuff. So I decided not to take that any further forward. And then, I sort of had a bunch of ideas bouncing around in my head over sort of, many years that I never actually sat down and prototyped. And Hexahedra actually was pretty much the first. I mean, people will say never ever make your first prototype. Well, I pretty much am, and hopefully it's going to work out for me. But it did seem to have that spark of, this is actually fun. And the first time I sort of could set up a solution, actually watch it play, I was like, yes, bam, this is the game experience I want. So yeah, maybe in that. So maybe in some respect, maybe the wise thing would have been to sort of make 3 prototypes and pick my favorite one. I don't know, but I decided, this has got it. And since it's gone into open beta, the feedback predominantly has been, pretty overwhelmingly has been, yes, this has got the spark it needs. So I think I've done okay.
And you find that spark again. That is always one of the hardest things when you're focusing on any dev like this, because I've seen games that developers will sometimes try to chase that fun. They'll try to chase that spark and force it to work where it may not be there to begin with. And it's always good to hear, like, your very first prototype, or your very first open beta, people are resonating with it. Because if they're not resonating with it then, it's very unlikely they're going to be resonating with it 6 months, 2 years down the line, kind of thing.
Yeah. It's kind of sad that it's quite easy to have a game that kind of has all the pieces of something fun, but hasn't quite arranged them in the right way. You've got some sort of twin stick shooter that seems to do all the right things, but for some reason doesn't all fit. So it is easy to do, and then you kind of trying to chase and sort of backport that, but it doesn't really work. I mean, I think possibly with a puzzle game, because it's in some ways it's what you're doing is reduced down to quite a small core in many ways. You don't have a lot of it's the kind of game, Hexahedra is the kind of game where you end up with complex systems from a very simple set of rules, rather than trying to take lots of different systems and jam them together into something fun. So I think you probably improve your odds, with that kind of game, just because the core essence of it is relatively compact. So you can tell whether that core is fun.
Yeah,
I think relatively early on. Whereas if you're trying to make an MMO, like does everything work together? Who knows? There's a crafting system. Is it fun? Well, I don't know, but is the combat system? So it's one of the reasons I think I wanted to pick a small scale game, is the number of things I had to do and get right was relatively limited.
And you shouldn't do an MMO as your first indie game.
No, absolutely not.
That is certainly an important game dev tip for the people listening to us right now. Yeah, and with kind of like puzzle design in general, as you said, it is very more encapsulated. Like, if you can solve puzzle A, you kind of can build that knowledge base for puzzle B, C, D, and so on. And it is one of those challenges, I think, in terms of onboarding. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on this, because one of the challenges that we see, especially when it comes to puzzle or abstracted-based design, is that the moment you get frustrated, kind of your interest in the game will oftentimes nosedive. Because if I can't solve the 3rd puzzle, what makes anyone think I'm going to be able to solve the 5th puzzle or the 6th puzzle, and so on?
Yeah, and there's a trick I've pulled straight from Opus Magnum, and I have no shame in it. Is that the first level of that game, you don't actually do anything except press play. All it does is it set up a working solution to a thing. You press play, you watch all the arms swing around and they move atoms about and that kind of thing. But you can see the whole thing working. You can see all the commands in the bottom kind of being played out in order. You can see what that does. And then the next level is like 2/3 solved for. You've got to sort of move 3 sets of atoms around. 2 of them are already wired in, you can't move them. So if you press play, 2/3 of the puzzle is already working. You can watch that and you can then work out what it is you need to do. And so I've taken that approach where, again, the first level is just kind of, here's what a factory works, here are some commands, this is what it does, press play. And then the second level there's a kind of a working example that's almost what you need on one side, and you build your solution on the other side. So as well, because you can see something that is almost the answer you need, you can sort of apply sort of pretty basic reasoning skills to work out, well, okay, this is what I need to do to get to where I am. So because it's the first few levels really are kind of holding your hand, particularly in the sense of teaching you how to use the UI as well as teaching you to play the game. Seems to be comfortable with that. So I took the game to Insomnia 68, which is a big LAN thing in the UK, happened at Easter, and it was at the expo there. And I wasn't making people sit through the tutorial, I was talking them through it rather than making them sort of, read the little character with his little videos. But it was interesting that sort of the first level they had to do stuff, they would need a little bit of prompting of like, yeah, so make sure you put that there. Okay, and then if you look at this thing, you can see that needs to go over there. And then the third level, which is the second level you do something, they would just go bam, 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 and they'd do it almost without thinking about it. Because, they'd now understood how the UI worked. And so the next puzzle wasn't that much harder. And so they very quick, almost nobody didn't get that third puzzle right first time.
Mm-hmm.
So they then got the satisfaction of, oh, this one, I got this one, this was good. Bam, that was in the bag. I've done this, and I've used a device I never used before. I painted a cube. And so I think that sort of very early onboarding, where teaching people they can play this game is as important as teaching them to play the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think there's always, again, onboarding. We could probably spend the next hour on that topic alone when it comes to games like this. For, me, personally, for people watching, I'm curious if you have the same reaction to puzzle games like this. Always the challenge when it comes to onboarding is that I do like the first 2-3 puzzles, the very hand-holdy, as you said, the standard first puzzles, you literally watching everything work. And then the moment they let you off the leash, and it's like, okay, here's a blank screen, solve it. That's oftentimes where my mind goes blank in a lot of these games, especially some of the more complicated ones. And I think teaching people the logic behind your different objects, your different puzzles, that I think is always the most challenging aspect of it, because you're now you're trying to teach a player not to do X, Y, and Z, but kind of the processes behind X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and it's I guess that's the big test for how much they've taken in, whether they've taken it in at a sort of I can sort of reproduce what you want me to, rather than I sort of understand this at a core level. I mean, the first level, it doesn't give you any hand holding at all. It doesn't introduce any new mechanics. It just says here's another version of the thing you've already seen, but and I mean, part of what we'll come to see as you play Hexahedra is that the factories get bigger and bigger and bigger. But then this is a minimal size, one workstation, factory with very little scope. So the number of things you could try is actually quite limited. So that sort of limits their sort of potential space for getting lost. I guess the other thing about this kind of a game is that obviously in a lot of puzzle games, there's what you're trying to find the answer. That's the puzzle. Whereas something like this, there's many different ways you can solve the puzzle, and your first solution might be horribly inelegant, might take ages to run, but it's your solution, it works, you understand why it works, and it doesn't matter that it takes 3 times as long as your friends. You still solve the puzzle, so there's a lot of scope to solving things inefficiently is okay. The game doesn't punish you for that.
Yeah. And the philosophy, I think that's always that challenging aspect. I think it's something that even Zach has had kind of challenge with his games. That there's oftentimes a lot of very subtle techniques and layers, especially if you go back and play something like Space Chem or Infinite Factory, where the game doesn't outright teach you how to set up an if-then loop or a just an infinite loop along those lines. But they give you the different pieces, and then your brain can kind of figure out, well, if I use this and I put it here, here's an if-else or if-then-else statement. But I think, again, that challenge of these games is that it really depends on just how, I think, programming-centric your mind is. And I just wonder if that was one of the reasons why in, some of his later games, like Opus Magnum, for instance, that they kind of gotten away from, again, having the programming side, and it's more about kind of that abstracted, I guess, programming logic, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose in some way there is, for some people, a bit of a stigma of all programming's hard. I don't know how to program. I couldn't play a game where I had to program stuff. But yeah, the fact that it's visual and it kind of intuitively makes sense. You don't need to know. You don't. if you're playing Space Cam and you've got the sensors, the atom sensors that kind of go one way or the other, you don't need to know what an if statement is. It's very visual. If there's an H, we go this way. If we don't, we go this way. It makes it kind of uses a different bit of your brain, but to get to the same place, I think. So, yeah, you got that advantage of it being a bit more abstract in a good way.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in terms of complexity or depth for Hexahedra, I guess what kind of audience are you aiming for? Are you aiming for the people who can, beat a Zach like, or people who are like new, or everywhere in between?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to put anybody who's new off. I want it to be accessible. So interesting. There's an unofficial Zachtronics Discord, and I sort of shared the game there, and I thought if these guys hate it, I'm stuffed, because if they don't think it's a good version of this game, if this genre, then I'm nowhere. But they like it, which is good. But some of them are saying, oh, I feel like there may be too many tutorial levels. But I thought there were too many tutorial levels on Opus Magnum as well. And I know Zach has said that OM is their most popular game by a huge margin. It's their most successful game. You do need to cater to the newcomers to the genre, and you want to make it and anything that. So a game that they can pick up, anybody can pick up. So that, there's no, one or two sort of veterans might sort of chafe at having to sort of, not being thrown at the deep end. But you are making the game more accessible to, in a kind of playability sense to everybody. There's never really a good reason to put off newcomers to your genre. I mean, it's just kind of self-defeating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially when you are working with a genre that's already kind of like on the nichier side of things. You really need, and this I think another aspect of when we talk about going to full-time indie dev, you really need to look at the market, and especially look at any ways you can expand on it. Because I think one of the challenges that we see from a lot of indie developers is that they become so laser focused on that very niched, very hardcore set, that they end up kind of limiting the game for newcomers. And it's something that we can certainly point to any number of challenging or, get good examples of games over the last few years. And oftentimes I think looking at things from an approachability and a UX standpoint are very key, especially if you are a new indie developer, because you can't really rely on, I think, both your name kind of selling the game, and people, willing to put up with, the same issues in your game that they saw in this much more successful game of the same genre.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've got no reputation to trade on as an indie dev, particularly because the slightly weird thing about the way Jagex does stuff is we all have mod names. So, I wasn't known as Chris Knowles. I was Mod Genesis to the sort of playing public. So even my name has changed effectively. So and no one has any idea who I am. So you've got nothing to trade on there. And sorry, what was the second thing you said?
About that you can't rely on people looking past issues in your version of the game that were in the more popular or the more established developers' games.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to. Well, yeah, what am I trying to say? I've taken my lead from sort of in some things in terms of how the UI works from established games, because they've been iterating on these things for a while. But one thing I've tried to fix with these games is if you're playing Space Game or something, and cycle 7004 the level fails because some molecule collides with another one, and the only thing you can do to work out what's going on is go back to start and watch it. So I spent a long time adding the ability to rewind the factory, so when it breaks you can go back in time and work out where it broke, and you can then kind of sort of drag time backwards and forwards and find out exactly where it's going wrong, which if my game needs a killer feature, I'm pretty sure that's it. So being able to go, I don't think any game in the other game in the genre lets you rewind time to kind of find your bugs. So that I'm hoping is that can be a frustration of like, and I found that frustration with these games of there's a problem, so you go back to rewatch and try and work out where it's happening, and you miss it, or you watch it but it's very quick and you're still not quite sure what's wrong, and you have to go and watch it from the start again. That's the thing I'm sort of trying to. That's the sort of particular niggle that this genre has, which I think other games haven't cracked.
Mm-hmm. And that's another really good point about trying to figure out where people have not gone with a genre and where you can go differently in that space. Because again, one of the challenges of, and this is something I just wrote about, or I just did a video on, that when you're being inspired by another game or another genre, you can't just make that same game. Because if you do, people are always going to be going, why are you just copying this other developer? Oh, and I'm hearing some noise. Let me just close my door really fast. There we go. But as I was saying, you can't just say, well, my game is like this, but maybe instead of a blue background, it's now a green background. So I guess to build all of that with Hexahedra, what did you kind of look at in terms of like other programming based games or programming puzzle based games and kind of said, okay, I want to do this differently?
I mean, I think so. In terms of the way the programming in Hexahedra works, sort of that was a model I tried in the prototype, and it turns out that basically all of these games have their own slightly different way of programming, and no one's done it quite like that before. So it's already a little bit in its sort of core of how do I program this thing. It's already different to other things, so it's got that going for it. And yeah, and it's got. Obviously, it does have some similarity to things like Factorio, but obviously that's a big open world thing. This is very much a discrete level-based thing, which most of them are. So in that sense, it's sort of in sort of familiar territory on that end of things. Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else design-wise. I do want to talk a little bit about your plans for your upcoming Kickstarter, but while I'm trying to think of any more questions, is there anything else from a design standpoint that we didn't touch on yet?
I pitched an entire talk for a conference about the rewind feature because it took a long time to make. But I've explained the core of it. How it sort of manages to do that and how it sort of tracks the data in through time and stuff. I could talk about that for hours, but yeah. But no, I think we're on the we've kind of covered it. I think. Yeah.
Okay. I guess here's a question for you. Are you planning, another big point about these games is being able to have like a level editor or some kind of way to create your own puzzles. Do you have anything planned for Hexahedra like that?
Yes, there will be a level editor. I've currently got one that runs in Unity and spits out JSON files. It's not very useful. But yes, there will be a sort of drag and drop kind of editor in. I do plan to get it working with the Steam Workshop as well, so people can share their levels easily with some other system for. If I get it onto other platforms, I'll need some other alternative system for that. But yes, sharing levels is very much a thing. The other thing I'm going to be doing is there'll be a stats service. Whenever you finish a level, it'll get submitted to a backend, which will just very quickly verify the result, and then can work out. That's how it'll power the leaderboard, so it can sort of check no one's fudging their results. There's one thing I want to do, which is that can then obviously work out what the record is for a particular level in terms of speed or components or something. So I want to rig that up to a Twitter bot, which will then sort of tweet whenever a record gets broken. That sounds fun. Yeah. I did. One thing I suppose you could talk about actually is how the core logic that works out what your factory does is built kind of separately to Unity, so it exists as a DLL. It's still written in C#, but it's not in Unity, and that means that I can plug that into the stats server very sort of in a low overhead way. I don't have to spin up a Unity instance to check a solution. I can just run it as pure code as fast as the CPU will carry it, and so that then kind of makes it sort of reusable. And also, as it turned out, the way I then had to get information out of that DLL into Unity is what made the rewind feature possible. So that I didn't plan that right from the start. That kind of fell out of the data structures I'd produced. Actually, it's now actually pretty plausible for me, because in every step in your factory, I've got this whole series of events about what are going to happen in that step, and I can just save those and replay them later. So I've got this sort of clear separation between Unity. Basically, is only there to show you what's going on and gather your UI input, whereas the actual logic of what does this factory do is in its own little DLL off to the side.
Interesting. And AJ asked, will the level editor allow you to make your own campaigns?
Ooh, that's interesting. I've not thought about that yet. I suppose it could. You could always string them all together, I suppose, in individual levels anyway, but having, support for a campaign in that sense. Because at that point, you'd need to sort of... your editor, I suppose, would need to encompass, joining the levels together and kind of presenting them in the right way. There's no reason why not, in theory. yeah, I mean, I'll certainly the first thing I'll do will be individual levels, but yeah, potentially it could do.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I just had a question. Hmm. Yeah, I think we kind of covered a lot of the gameplay. Again, we're going to be doing the demo, or we'll start the demo probably in the next, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll see how that plays out. But I guess let's talk a little bit about the Kickstarter. So, for people listening to us right now, we are recording this right at the start of May. And as you were saying before we started, that you're planning on going to Kickstarter. So, for people listening to us, I guess, what are your plans in terms of Kickstarter?
So up to now, I've self-funded, and sort of me programming stuff is sort of going to continue to happen for free. But what I do want is more assets, more environments in the game. So when we play, you'll see there's sort of one factory environment with a set of devices. But as you go through the game, I want you to kind of sort of level up your career. So the idea is you're trying to get to Earth to work at the most prestigious key fabricator, which is called Hexahedra Incorporated, and we'll have a factory which will be kind of nice and lots of floaty things, and it'll be a bit like sort of, Apple meets Aperture Science, kind of lots of smooth lines and that kind of thing. But the place you're going to start out is all things cobbled together from sort of scrap parts. So, the cleaner device, which in what we'll see later is like a sort of a car wash scrubber thing. In the sort of scrappy factory, it'll be a bike wheel with a sponge on it, which will just kind of spin around and clean things. So you're sort of going to go through that progression as you play through the game. But I also need to pay people to make that stuff. So mostly what I'm going for is people. What I need is funds to pay the freelancers to make all that stuff. So yeah, that's why I'm going to Kickstarter. And in terms of sort of what's up for grabs, sort of the basic tier of have a game and have the soundtrack, all the way up to these companies in the game need names. So if you want to name a corporation, fine, pick this tier and there you go. Yeah. So I mean, what else do you want to know about the Kickstarter?
I guess for people listening to us right now, what is your estimated time to actually go on Kickstarter?
So my hope is to run it pretty much in June. So starting probably about a week into June, going to the first week of July. That's the current plan. That may get slip. So I don't want to make any promises. But that would coincide well with Steam Next Fest in June. Yeah, and so run it for a month there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for people listening to this right now, if they want to download and try the demo or the beta for Hexahedra, it is available on Steam. You can just request it, and most people can get into it.
Yeah. So I've completely opened it up on Steam. So some people might not know it's a relatively new feature. Steam now has a playtest feature, so you can run betas and stuff through Steam very easily. So if you go to the Steam page, which I can stick a link in the chat or something, maybe, I don't know. Then where are we?
See, I can put a link in the chat here.
I've got the short link memorized. I can type it out very quickly now. Yeah. So if you go to there's a button that says request access on the page, which will let you in basically immediately. So the Steam lets you control exactly how people get into the beta, but I've just opened everything up. So if you say you want access, you're in straight away, and you can then download it.
I mean, that's a very interesting feature. I've seen a few other games go that route. And are you planning on, after the Kickstarter, are you planning on going to early access with Hexahedra?
I don't think so. So, I mean, I'm going to go to a demo rather than a playtest, basically because that's what Steam Next Fest sort of requires you to do. But that's actually going to have very little change. In fact, if you're playing the open beta, the data will carry over and you should just be able to carry on playing. But assuming I meet the funding goals, then one of the tiers will be get access to the closed beta rather than the demo while I'm continuing to develop it. But if the funding goals are met, then I think I'm in a position where I can launch and start selling a finished product, which I mean, obviously there's upsides to both ways, but I think if I can hit the ground running with on sort of commercial release with the finished product, I think that's probably going to put me in a good place.
And if the Kickstarter goes through and everything works on that respect, do you have an estimated time for hopefully releasing the game?
I think probably Q2 next year. So partly because it'll take all the freelancers a while to put together all the stuff. There is still more dev work for me to do, so I need to actually design a lot more puzzles. But also, I mean, some of the more advanced devices aren't fully working yet. So the demo doesn't have the teleporter. which just lets you move cubes around large distances. You can't put things inside the cubes yet, so there'll be a way that you'll be able to take the side off, throw a thing inside, put a side back on again, that kind of thing. So I need to get those fully working. But yeah, yeah, yeah. So I knew when I started this, it would take me longer than I thought. It's already taken me longer than the longer I thought. But hopefully, I'm now at the point where I've got a vague handle on how much work there is left to do.
I guess that's actually another good question for you. In terms of, I guess, complexity of the mechanics, I guess, what is like the most advanced thing that you can do in Hexahedra?
So probably the way the branching logic works. So you've got 3 different ways to branch your logic. There's a panel sensor which kind of tries to suction onto the cube and give it a shake, which if there's a panel facing it, it can do, and if there isn't, it can't. And they just said, basically it's working out, is there a panel facing me? But you've then got the laser, which is branching based on color, and whatever color surface it hits. But the thing about a laser beam is it will just keep traveling until it hits something. So a workstation over here can alter its behavior based on the state of a cube all the way over here, because the laser beam will just keep going until it hits something. And the third one that isn't implemented yet is the weigher, which does it based on mass. So you've then got to worry about what's your cube made of, how many sides has it got, what's inside it, and that kind of thing, and then setting a threshold for when it will sort of go one way or the other. So that's where you get your sort of complex branching behavior from, and there's sort of various different ways to do that.
And I guess as another question, then on top of that, how long is like the actual like main campaign of the game, or what you're planning for?
I think it's going to depend how into optimization you are. So I'm the kind of player who likes to finish a level, see what my friends' scores are, and then keep doing that level until I manage to equal their scores, or I give up in frustration because I can't quite see how they've done it. Whereas if you wanted to romp through the game, it would take you, correspondingly less time. But it's easier to spend hours on a single Opus Magnum level, kind of tweaking it to bits. So yeah, there'll be. We'd be talking sort of, probably, I would guess, about 40, 50 levels in the finished thing, which is going to be, even just if you just went through them once, would be, a good number, maybe that many hours of gameplay, depending on how quickly you get a solution working. Whereas if you don't want to get back and tweak things, then, much more.
All right. And for me, I just look at my friends and just imagine they're all just cheating or hacking the game to make me feel better when I can't figure out how they're like 30 steps faster than me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. For chat, if you have any questions for Chris about Hexahedron, Indie Life, anything like that, please get them in now, because we'll be switching over to the demo, or to our demo run, in the next few minutes. I guess for you, anything else regarding being a full-time indie that we didn't discuss? Any thoughts on that or any details?
Yeah, I've had a great benefit from, because I was in the industry for a long time, that it was relatively easy for me to sort of, know who to go and talk to get help with things. Which, obviously that's not very helpful advice. Go work in the industry for 13 years, then you'll then have lots of contact. But that sort of, it's made it a much less difficult journey than I think it would have been. So that's been a helpful experience to have just had, a lot of coding experience and making games, but also just getting to know people who've moved on. So the first freelancer I hired was someone who used to work at Jagex and is now a freelance illustrator. So it was easy to get in touch with her and say, hey, I like your stuff. Please make me some things. In fact, the picture behind me, there we go. That was made by her. So, so if I was doing it from a position of, I've got massive respect for people who try and go indie immediately after university. And there's nothing wrong with trying to do that. And I hope they all succeed. But I would find it much, much harder if it not for the sort of the prior context I had.
All right, so for people watching this recorded, we did the live demo of Hexahedra, and it was a lot of fun. It was also a lot of confusion on me trying to figure out how rotation and turning things work. But that will be part of a second video, which I'm not sure if I'll include this on the main channel or on our gameplay one, but there will be links to everything in their respective descriptions. So, before I let you go for tonight, Chris, do you have anything you want to say, anything about Hexahedron, the fans watching, anything at all?
Oh, I think we've covered everything. I mean, I've had a lot of fun making it. It's been great. One of the ways I've sort of tried to keep myself motivated as a solo indie is by streaming everything on Twitch, and it's been great to see people who kind of keeping me company and watching it develop with me and kind of be enthusiastic and making suggestions and that kind of thing. So thank you to everyone who's helped me out with that. But yeah, I'm excited to be, it's in open beta. I'm excited that people are now playing it. I'm approaching Kickstarter and it's all getting very real.
And it's very easy to play. You have the developers sitting on stream with you, giving you advice. I mean, just be around all the time, Chris, and nobody will have any problem with the game.
I'll offer a very personalized surface. Yeah, it'll be good. Yeah.
So, for people watching this record, so just to clarify that you're planning on doing the Kickstarter for early June, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And depending on when this cast will go up, there may be a link to that in the description down below. But in terms of social media, anything like that, if you have anything you'd like to promote, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me at SideQuest Ninja on Twitter for dev updates and screenshots and stuff. There is a Discord server for the game if you want to come and give feedback or report bugs. I've got a nice gamified bug reporting system. So if you report a bug in the game, it gives you a code. If you then message a bot with that code, and then go to leaderboard of who's reported the most bugs. So feel free to join in with that. I could drop a link in for that if that works. Where are we? Here it is.
I will try to include that in the recorded version then, because I know YouTube can be a little weird in terms of links, in terms of the public chat.
Yeah, okay. At SideQuest Ninja for Twitter, Taranum on Steam, TARRENAM, and on Steam on Twitch. That's what I'm trying to say. So if you want to go and have a look on Twitch and see any game dev in action, come and ask me questions, ask me about the game. If you want a tour of the code base, I'm very happy to do that. I like talking shop. So come and say hi there.
Mm-hmm. And if this is going up around the time of the Kickstarter, the pre or the beta test version that I just played, you'll have an actual demo up around that time for the Kickstarter?
Yeah. So I think by then I'll have transitioned from the Steam playtest to a Steam demo, but it'll essentially be pretty much the same build but with more polishing. But yes, it'll still be accessible. So yes, a big part of the Kickstarter is you can play my game right now and see how you think it works. So yeah.
All right. Other than that, it was a lot of fun. It's definitely going to be a challenging game, and I'm sure the Zachtronics-like fans are going to enjoy doing a lot of rotations and cutting up cubes. For the people watching us record right now, again, if you want to watch the complete demo of our play, I'll include a link to that in the description down below. And Chris, it has been a pleasure hanging out with you. Best of luck with the Kickstarter. And if you're free in the future, we can certainly have you back on and do some more plays and talking.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun.
All right. So, for everyone watching, I'm going to end things here for this week's episode. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, Discord, Patreon, all that good stuff, there's descriptions up there. They're in the show notes as well. Be sure to join the Discord if you want to talk game design and game dev, and be sure to check out my books on design. And as always, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game or just want to talk shop, feel free to get in touch. I'm always looking for guests. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where he's in the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.